name is Uta from Kefir Culture, and today I'm going to show you a step-by-step on how to make kefir water. So let's start our fermentation. We've got all our equipment ready. You need a jar. It needs to have some room at the top depending on how much you want to ferment. This is a 3 litre jar. We're going to put 1.2 litres in it, but you could easily put 2 to 2.5 litres in it without a problem, as long as you have a little bit of room at the top so that the brew can breathe. Now, the first thing to do is to use the sugar, which we've measured out previously. As I said, the proportions are 1 to 2, so 2 portions of grains to 1 portion of sugar, whatever that equates to. In this case, we've got about half a cup of grains, of water kefir grains, to 1/4 cup of sugar. And the idea is to combine your sugar with your molasses in the one container. Also, you can add the pinch of bicarb at this point. It doesn't need much. And we add a small amount of warm water to assist us in dissolving that sugar more quickly, because you do want to add the grains to the sugar and water once it's been pre-mixed. And the molasses can be quite sticky, so if you just put it in the jar without having any liquid in it, it tends to stick and doesn't want to mix very well. So that's already quite well mixed. What we'll do is we'll add some water to the jar first. We can then add our pre-dissolved sugar. There's still some in there, and we can do that once it's in your glass jar. Just rinse that out so you don't lose anything. Add that to your jar, and then add the rest of the water. I've measured out 1.25 litres. If you do 1/4 cup of grains to 3/4 cup, you can use 1 to 1.5 litres. So we recommend that you use wooden utensils or plastic as a preference, but you can use stainless steel. You just need to make certain that it is stainless steel. Any other metals can react with your brew. Okay. So let's just take that out. Now, this is a cork top jar. You can use a cork, but you can also use a cloth with a fastener, as long as there's some air that can get in and out of your brew. Now we add our grains. The best water temperature is between 18 and 21 degrees for the fermentation process, but it will ferment outside of those parameters. It slows down when it gets cooler. It will quicken up when it actually is a little warmer. Now, the other thing that when you first get your grains, you are not likely to have a brew. So what we recommend is you add a couple of slices of lemon. If you can't get organic, make sure that you clean it really well to get any of the pesticides off. And you pop that into your jar to acidify the water, because the grains actually like a little bit of an acid environment for it to do their job. Once you've got your first brew, you can choose to use part of your brew from the previous brew and actually add that to your first fermentation. That will also... Okay, so it's as simple as that. Your grains have been added, we've mixed it. it's at room temperature. We now add the cloth to your jar, or you could pop the cork on as well. It's really to make sure that you don't have any insects getting in there, because of the sugar water. Fruit flies are very attracted to the brew. So you can use a simple fastener or a rubber band will do the trick. We've got a cloth one which we can throw in the wash here. So it just needs to sit tight. Find a nice cool or temperate place in your house that has a constant temperature, away from direct sunlight, and let it ferment for 48 to 72 hours. You'll see the grains will probably start to swirl around. They don't always do that, but generally you'll find as it ferments and it swirls grains in the brew. So some might float to the top and some will sink back to the bottom, and that's perfectly normal. I also recommend you have a taste of what it tastes like at this point when you first put the sugar and water together, so you have an idea of how sweet it is, and you taste it during those 3 days of fermentation, and you will find that it will change in flavor profile. It will become a little bit more fruity, and the acidity will start to be part of the brew. Your first fermentation is done. So I'll now show you how to do a second fermentation if you choose to do that, and there are a couple of different ways to do it. So we'll just have a look and see what we've got here. So this is the brew that's been sitting for 3 days, and what we do, we can see that some of the grains are actually floating, as I mentioned, and that they actually swirl around and convect in the brew. So there's 2 ways to do this. One of the ways is to do a second fermentation and add fruit in another glass container, and you would do that on the bench as well, or you could do it in the fridge. That is up to you. It will slow it down somewhat, but it will still ferment. The other option is to actually add it to the bottle straight away, and you can still add fruit to that. I always recommend that you choose dry fruit rather than fresh fruit, simply because it's been my experience that fresh fruit tends to carbonate the drink quite a lot, and it also adds additional alcohol. So if that's something you're trying to avoid, my recommendation would be to go with dry fruit. Or the other option that I found, if you want to store it for longer periods of time, up to 6 months, that you can actually use maple syrup, which provides a nice clean taste. It means you can still add some other things to it before you drink it, and it ferments quite well, it carbonates really well, and it does store up to 6 months. So let's have a go at doing this. Let's do the jar version first, and I'm only going to fill it halfway just so that I can demonstrate. So what you will also need, if you want to do it this way, is you need to strain your brew to make sure you remove the grains from the first fermentation before you put it into your second fermentation. So I found this is quite a good way to do it. If you can get a funnel and then a sieve that fits into it, or the other option, another way to do it, and I'll show you how to do that, would be to simply get a cotton cloth or a linen cloth and then pour that through using that, and that will also catch the grains. It's a good idea to have a little container. I use this little sieve. So you just empty it out. I'm going to use the sieve in this instance because I don't really need to use the cloth at this point. So you can just pop that in there, put some more in. You would do that till you've obviously emptied your brew. I will just set this aside and we will do the bottle version. Again, funnel is super handy and you can basically just pour that straight in. It will take out the larger sections of whatever might be floating. Again, if you do not like the fluke, which I said is totally harmless, this is a good way to eliminate a considerable amount of the fluke if you do it this way, and actually the cloth will filter. It will filter the kefir water quite nicely. So the thing here is you actually need to just, when they've collected, just empty that out and pop it back in and basically just drain your brew. What I suggest with, if you're going to ferment straight in the bottle for your second fermentation, I recommend that you leave about that much room at the top of your bottle. It makes it easier for you to be able to release the pressure, because sometimes it will bubble up quite quickly, and it also gives it a little bit of room to build up a little bit of pressure. So for this exercise, I'm going to add some dried blueberries. You don't need many, probably only about 5 or 6, and you can add Inca berry. I've got Inca berries because I like the flavour of these because they're slightly acidic. And you just pop them in. The thing that you do need to do, this one's quite big, so what I do recommend, if you put any kind of fruit in, when it is dried, you're going to find that it wants to expand. So you need to make sure that it's small enough that they will come back once they've rehydrated in the kefir water. So that's probably enough for what we're trying to do. I've probably put about 6 or 7 in there. I'm going to chop this up and just show you how far we want to go with this. That's about how much I would want to put in there. You can use screw top bottles. They just need to have a really nice tight lid, simply because as pressure builds up, it will put a lot of tension on your bottle. And I have had the misfortune of having one explode on me, and it is not a fun thing. So this can be left either in the fridge or on the bench. It needs to be burped on a regular basis. It will build up carbonation, and the probiotics and yeasts that are currently in there will actually be fed by the dried fruit that has a sugar content. So they will absorb the sugar. The fruit will have no flavour once the sugar has gone into the probiotics and it's been consumed. And as part of the byproduct, you also get the natural carbonation of the drink, which is why you need to release some of the pressure as it does that, because it builds up. So it's a touch and feel thing. You really need to just check things. As I said, you can keep it for a longer period of time, but I highly recommend you use maple syrup as opposed to dried fruit. It imparts flavour, but I find that the dried fruit tends not to make the drink very alcoholic. So that's a really simple second fermentation. Let's pretend that this is full. What we would do is we just add fruit, and you can use any type of fruit providing that there is some sugar content. These are frozen blueberries. So, you know, you can put some frozen blueberries in, they will still work fine. You can put apple. Apple's quite nice. Again, the sugar will just get absorbed. And you do need to, once again, put a cloth on top. Okay, so now that we've added the fruit, we can leave that for another 2 to 3 days, either on the bench or you can put it in the fridge. That's pretty much it for second fermentations. Okay, so here's one that we prepared earlier, as they say. This is been fermented for roughly a month and a half to 2 months. I will pop this and you'll see how much pressure builds up, but we've popped this on a regular basis and actually burped the bottle. So that is quite a bit of carbonation, and you can see that if I let go now, it will literally hit my ceiling. So you need to be quite careful with how much pressure you let out on a regular basis, and I burp my bottles generally once a week. And you can see that I actually need to put that back down because it's really active. So there's lots of carbonation. If you like carbonation in your drink, you can certainly get it to this point. It just takes a little bit of time for it to mature and for it to continue to eat the sugars that are in there. Ooh, here we go. Now you'll see that there's also a little bit of, I don't know if you can see, but there's a little bit of fluke in the bottle at the top, which also sometimes happens, that it floats. That can be a little bit of yeast. Yeast tends to float. Okay, it's still going. Okay, I'm gonna put it down. It's a good idea to do this over the sink. I'm doing it on the bench today simply because I'm doing a demonstration for you, but I tend to do this over the sink just in case we have a spillage. So that's it, look at that. And then you have a delicious, naturally carbonated, probiotic kefir water.